velkommen til Internasjonalt kulturseminar. Hører dere meg greit, alle sammen? Veldig bra. Dere må gi beskjed hvis dere ikke gjør det. Jeg Linda Setra, kultursjef i Arendal kommune. Veldig hyggelig å se så mange her i dag. And to our international guests, a warm welcome to Arendal, to Arendals Uka, and to this seminar. We are very excited and happy to have you here. I will do this little opening in Norwegian, but the rest of the day, the program will be held in English most of the time. For fjerde gang arrangerer vi altså dette internasjonale kulturseminaret Kunst som sosial drivkraft under Arendalsuka. Og samarbeidspartnerne Arendal kommune, Aust-Agder fylkeskommune, Mimeta, Nordisk informasjonskontor, og i år har vi også blitt solid forsterket med Norsk kulturråd, og det vi veldig glad for å sette stor pris på. Det viser at den tematikken vi har satt fokus på de siste årene viktig, og for hvert år utforsker vi nye områder av temaet. Jeg skal si litt praktisk. Dette huset vi nå i, Arendal gamle rådhus, ble bygd i 1812-1813. Og det visst nok landets høyeste trehus og nest største trebygning. Som dere ser så det et fantastisk festlokale, men det ikke først og fremst en konferansesal. Og det betyr at det noen praktiske utfordringer, men vi har i dag blitt forsterket med en veldig god lydtekniker bak her, Roger, så vi satser på at vi kommer til å klare det greit, men se litt gjennom fingrene hvis det blir litt småting underveis. Arendalsuka har veldig mange spennende arrangementer, og vi har forståelse for at noen av dere ønsker å komme og gå litt, men det veldig fint om dere benytter pausene til det, så ikke det blir så urolig når noen holder innlegg. Det noen små endringer i programmet som har lagt på nett. Vi sendte det ut til dere som påmeldt i går på e-post. Det henger også noen oppslag rundt forbi, så dere kan se på hvilke tider som gjelder. Hele seminaret blir streamet, så det betyr at vi på lufta. Og det ligger lenke ute på Facebook-arrangementet og på Kulturrådets nettside dersom dere har lyst til å dele det med noen. Det toalett nede i etasjen under oss, og så vil lunsjen foregå i lokalene innover her. Det vil ikke være nok sitteplass til alle, men det wraps med kalkun, så det fullt mulig å ta den i hånda og ta seg en tur ut i sola og sette seg ned der hvor man måtte ønske det. Det en del som har meldt inn spesielle behov, og de vil finne maten sin på et eget bord og med navn på. Så de som ikke har meldt inn, de kan vi dessverre ikke bidra med å finne på noe nytt, for kjøkkenet har allerede laget alt klart. Jeg har også fått beskjed om at siden vi så fullt hus her i dag, så det viktig å tenke på brannforskriftene. Så skulle det skje noe, og skulle det være en alarm, så vil alle trekke ut i gangen her og benytte seg utgangen på baksiden. Så vi satser på at vi unngår det, men det greit å være på den sikre siden. Litt grann om historikken til dette seminaret. Vi har da som sagt arrangert 4 år på rad, og tematikken de siste 3 årene, eller temaet har vært kunst som sosial drivkraft. Men vi har sett på det fra forskjellige vinklinger. Hvordan kan kunst være et virkemiddel i den offentlige debatten? Hvilken rolle kan kunst ha i den lokale samfunnsutviklingen? Hvordan jobber kulturaktører på nye måter for å øke deltakelse og medvirkning og påvirke den demokratiske utvikling? Dette altså temaer som har blitt tatt opp tidligere år, og naturlig nok under Arendalsuka. Uka hvor den offentlige debatten tas helt konkret ut i det offentlige rom, ut på gata. Og det sies at det som har på en måte blitt slagordet til Øystein Djupedal i hvert fall, at det skapes et politisk dansegulv. Vi har ønsket å bidra til at den kulturpolitiske diskusjonen løftes frem. Og de første årene hvor Arendalsuka ble arrangert, så var kulturpolitikken lite synlig. Kultur var opplevelse og underholdning, men ikke i like stor grad til stede som ytring eller politikk. Og vi har ønsket at seminaret skal dreie seg om kulturens rolle i samfunnsutviklingen. Og i de årene det har blitt arrangert, har vi også vendt blikket utover i verden i stor grad, for å lære og for å bli inspirert. Det fortsetter vi med. De siste årene har den kulturpolitiske debatten blitt mer og mer synlig under Arendalsuka, og det skal mange ha æren for. Men dette seminaret har også vært medvirkende til det. Det har blitt en viktig arena. Denne dagens tema vil videre bli introdusert av vår eminente konferansier, Kamara Kristina Lundestad-Joff, som vil lose oss gjennom dagens program med, etter hva jeg tror vil bli en stødig hånd, fast og bestemt, med kunnskap og et stort personlig engasjement i temaet for dagen, fra sympati til kvalitet. Hun vil presentere seg selv for dere senere, men jeg kan jo nevne at hun blant annet er scenekunstner og dramatiker, og for nylig også forfatter. Hun vil stort sett snakke engelsk i dag, og det vil også mange av foredragsholderne gjøre. Men den første bolken på programmet nå vil være en samtale mellom kunstner Liva Yazzi og kulturrådsdirektør Kristin Danielsen. I fjor så utfordret den syriske kunstneren Liva Yazzi direktørene i de nordiske kulturrådene på hvordan vi snakker om kunstnere med utenlandsk bakgrunn. Hun mente at i tilfelle Syria så preget sympati og empati valg av produksjoner på europeiske scener mer enn kvalitet. Og dette danner utgangspunkt for årets tema, fra sympati til kvalitet. Og derfor starter vi dagen med en samtale mellom kulturrådsdirektør Kristin Danielsen og kunstner Liva Yazzi. Opprinnelig skulle samtalen foregått på Skype, men dessverre ikke dessverre da, Liva Yazzi er høygravid, og det er jo veldig bra. Men hun kunne dessverre ikke stille til en live Skype-samtale, og derfor vil vi benytte et opptak som er gjort tidligere. Og Kristin vil sette oss inn i konteksten og reflektere rundt temaet. Så velkommen Kristin Danielsen, og jeg vil ønske oss alle sammen en god dag. Jeg tror det blir en både spennende og inspirerende og lærerik dag.
Thank you. Oh, now you can hear me, loud and clear. I will switch to English now, out of courtesy to all our international guests. I'm so happy that so many of you could come and be here with us for this seminar. And I'd like to give you a short introduction to this interview so that you understand the concept of thinking behind this. But first of all, I have to say it's so nice to be here in Arendal. This is my hometown. And this is the town hall of Arendal, which has always been a house for festivities. And there was this wonderful ball tradition here in Arendal. So this room is a very special room for me. So a very warm welcome. Liva Yazzi, she is an artist from Syria. She is not a Syrian artist. And that's a big difference to her and to most artists. Because for most artists, it's very important that you're first and foremost an artist. Your nationality is always secondary. And we learned that from Liva last year. She was here. This is the 4th time that you organize this seminar. And it seems that the conversation is growing all the time. And I was very inspired by Liva's talk, because she had this phrase, from sympathy to quality, which really coins a lot of the challenges that we have when we want to create an inclusive art sector in the Nordic countries. From sympathy to quality. It really says it all. So later on that day, when we had a discussion with my Nordic colleagues that you will meet very soon, we just decided that we will follow this up. We will have a seminar where we discuss quality. Because sympathy is good, we sometimes do a lot of initiatives in the art sector for good reasons. But then it's all about quality. Some people say that immigration politics or foreign politics has got nothing to do with cultural politics. It's irrelevant to us because we're in the culture, we're in the arts, and we worry about quality, and that's it. And I believe that's a contradiction. I believe it's all about cultural policies. And I think that's what Liva really inspired us when she was here last year. So we tried to sum that up in an interview. She was not only going to be on Skype, she was going to be here live, but she is in happy conditions, as we say. I haven't seen this interview, and I really hope it's pretty good. I hope it sort of sums up what we've been doing. We had an hour-long conversation, and Silja has fantastically narrowed it down. It's important for the Arts Council of Norway to work with creating an inclusive art scene, not only in Norway, but in the Nordic countries. We are currently project management, this project that you have on your chairs, called An Inclusive Cultural Sector in the Nordics, which is managed by Silje Eikemo. You can just stand up and wave so that everybody can see you. She's also part of organizing the seminar, and she will say more about the project later on. The fact that we talk about quality is an opening point also for arts councils to be heavily involved in this project. And I have with me my Nordic colleagues, and we have plans on doing more work later on that we will present in a panel. So I believe we should start now and just play the video, and I'm very happy to introduce Liva Yasi, an artist from Syria, and she's concerned about moving from sympathy to quality.
Yeah. So what I really think is interesting in your presentation is when you talk about art versus charity, you know, that we have a tendency sometimes to promote bad art for a good cause.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And we do it sort of with goodwill, with our empathy, but then we end up destroying for the professional arts scene, and we don't really realize that. Can you say a little bit more about that? How is that problematic?
I guess it's really problematic because we are all tend to be in that position. I mean, it's not about a problem of European versus Middle Eastern problem. It's really also like I would give an example like Syria, Palestine, when Palestinian refugees came to Syria and like promoting. And like all Syrian institutions started as well in getting involved with Palestinian art scene, like Iraqi art scene and all this. So, I mean, it's really a question that I guess I started to learn from the Palestinian cause and Palestinian problem. Because then, like now when we say Palestinian art, we tend immediately to have a stereotype about that, which is really imprisoning them. So I'm trying really now to in a way to export the problem, to see it apart from Syria versus Europe. It's about newcomers, artists from a different crisis. So I mean, now it took the Palestinian art scene like really 2 or 3 decades to be a little bit able to liberate themselves as artists from the idea that when you say a Palestinian theater piece, that you know what you're going to see. Mm-hmm. So I mean, this is first of all a very imprisoning aspect, and then you immediately also attach this, unfortunately, to a quality problem.
Yes.
So I mean, living in that situation and trying and meeting people from them and seeing how they are mingling and like really getting in high debates and like this is not a representative of our Palestinian art scene or whatever. So I mean, now I see it repeated in history again with the Syrian artist being in Europe. So I mean, it's really dangerous because first of all, it creates heroes and it raises expectations for people who are not actually artists, who are really like civilians who are passed through very emotional turmoil and crisis, and they would like to express this, and they find art as a tool to express it.
Yeah.
So it first of all, it really spoils their relation to art. It gives them false expectations, and it also, from the other way around, it's like for the, let's say, Nordic audience or like German audience, there is a kind of an expectation and limitation about what they expect when seeing that. So I mean, there is really a kind of, let's say, superior-inferior problem coming here. It's about what do real artists now do when like everybody is like filming a short movie and putting it in a big festival? So I mean, it raises all these questions of the victims, because I would call them victims, like the people who try to use art as a medium, and they are like perceived by the international sphere as artists and big artists, and they get prizes, and like 5 years later, nobody cares about it. So it's creating a kind of a victim here,
and false expectations.
Yeah. And from the other way around, I do believe that art asks for, in a way, good art is, what is good about it is that you identify with it as an audience. I see this film, I see this theater, and I can identify with the protagonist, and I would say, yeah, this could happen to me. I identify with this crisis. And then, in a way, I feel it's a human crisis. It's a human problem. But when it comes to bad art, I would definitely alienate myself from it. I would say, yeah, it's happening somewhere else to somebody else who reacts in a different way, that our own artists, let's say in the Nordic countries, do it better. So like we have a different standard of that. So I immediately alienate myself from that cause, and I would say that would never happen to me. So I mean, this is also dangerous in terms of reception, and it's also dangerous in terms of real artists. It's because now you have the real artist who studied, who is working, who's very serious, equally treated in a way by somebody who's just like for the first time. I'm not criticizing first timers, but I mean it's in terms of quality. If it's a bad art, getting into like big institution and getting big prices, I mean it's really unfair. You're creating a kind of a little monster in the future for the art scene.
And do you feel that, for instance, art criticism, when you exhibit a work, then if you're from another country, art critics, they will treat you differently. Have you ever experienced that? I'm just curious, because that's sort of a continuation of what you say, because arts criticism is so important to a vibrant art scene.
It's very, thank you for raising this issue, because it's very important, because like when you're going to see, let's say a play or a film that talking about refugees or talking about people in crisis, I mean, what is the criteria for criticism in this? There are so many wide lines about what is politically correct, so I mean, then you're imprisoned as a critic in terms of this is a bad art, but about a good cause, what shall I do?
Exactly. If I sort of say that this is just not good enough, then people will slaughter you because it's an important case.
And I do believe it comes really from a step before, in a way, like, do I call a photograph exhibition done by amateurs in camps? Do I call it an art photography exhibition in a big gallery? What is the terminology of that? I would protect those young artists or like those amateur artists by not giving them very big names and big terminology, and then the criticism would be even milder on them. If you don't really raise the expectation of you as an audience or as a critic what you're going to see, I mean, you treat it in a bit milder way. I mean, you wouldn't say, yeah, I'm criticizing it as a photograph like done by artists. So I mean, if you try to work with the terminology, I guess it helps a lot. And of course, I do believe that it's the right of the critic to differentiate between these two things and to say, I am pro this cause, but the text is blah 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 blah. So
no, it's really interesting.
of how you present this. I know it's really also, it's coming from goodwill and enthusiasm. I would have been in the same situation. I definitely know that, it's just like you'd like to push the limits and like to make your own people involved more and like to show more also political campaign. It's in a way, we know that refugees and Syrian issues are no longer happening there. You know, like European Union is all now cracked down with the whole issue of refugees.
It cracks. It's cracking, yeah. But you know, this conversation can go on forever because it's so interesting to talk to you. But we sort of have this 15 minutes time limit. Can I ask you? I mean, we've been talking about stereotyping as a problem. We've been talking about using the wrong terminology, saying that this is actually a non-professional event. It's a documentation. It's not an arts exhibition. We can be better at that. We've been talking about arts criticism and how they should treat us all equally. Yeah. Can you just give some advice? If you, in the end, you know.
I was writing down like everything.
Oh, you've been writing. Okay, send it over, and I'll. No, but we can, you know, we can do that as well for the seminar. But it would be nice to have sort of a sum up.
Of course, yeah, it's funny. No, I'm not going to read all that because when I started thinking, you know, I'm just raising question. What should I do? You know, I don't know questions. I guess, like as you said, I mean, the things that you already mentioned, and also creating a kind of mutual experience between local artists and newcomer artists. I guess this is a very good thing for both of them. You know, I just think of it. I would like to work with like local artists in my field and like exchange and like not always be under the demand of showcasing, you know. It's because this is also problematic. Then you're always supposed to showcase and like to present a product at the end. Maybe it's just like the work together, just to look at where we are actually in terms of, you know, education workshops. But you know, I would also need like think of education and long sustainable things like workshops. I was thinking of this. And I have an idea that I would like to raise. I guess it's not about using art or artists to in terms of like integration would go to a more peaceful art scene. I would say like having debates and struggle is what is important, not to go to the neutrality. I mean, what is the target? Is the target to go to an integrated one-color art scene, or is it that so
we want diversity. I mean, we know that diversity is, first of all, it's natural. Look at nature. There are no monocultures in nature because, you know, if they keep reseeding the same seed, it will die. You know, so from the natural side, we need diversity. So how can human beings try and box ourselves in? I can't grasp that.
Yes, I guess because whenever I'm trying to think of it, like, what is the target? Is it like an integrated one block art scene that we know? I think it's very important to have the debate, to have the discussions about what is authenticity, what is, you know, what is the trends, how do I use my own tools, you know, because also for me as somebody who's coming from a different country, I have to answer all the questions again. Why am I writing? To whom am I writing? What is my audience? Who is? So I really have so many questions. Whereas also the other artists have these questions with all these people coming in. Am I allowed as a Norwegian artist to talk about Syrians? You know, so it's like all these issues, I guess. You know, because it's really very important to see. No. Syrian artist talk about Syria, and Norwegian artists talk about Norway. But that's not how we're living. I guess to give a space to debate and struggle, I guess that would come up with better results for the art scene. So like it's more lively, and it's for me also. I noticed like this is a very practical thing that I noticed from friends. They were telling me they get less fees as refugee artists, you know, or as.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut in so abruptly, but we're already a bit after the schedule. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kamara Lundestad Joof, and I'm a documentary performance writer and activist, political activist. And I'm here to guide you throughout the day. And I will keep it quite brief because we have a lot that we're going through today. We're here to talk about the intersection between arts and cultural policy and policy. We're here to talk about quality and sympathy. And I would usually start the day off with a joke. to liven it up. But here we are at Arendalsuka, one of the biggest platforms for Norwegian democracy. And parallel to our conference or seminar here today, we also have 4 right-wing extremist organizations holding booths and seminars at the same time, advocating for the fact that people who look like me and people who love like me should be allowed to exist in Norway, in Scandinavia, in Europe. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind while we are holding the seminar, that we have a job to do, an important job to do. And we are all, in a sense, artists or policymakers or people who want to implement a change here today, gathered in this room. So I think that we just have to take our jobs really fucking seriously. Yes. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce the first panel of the day. They will all get 15 minutes to introduce themselves and their work, and then I will put them together here on the stage and ask them some questions. And we'll also open up for questions from the audience. If you are uncomfortable asking your question in English, ask it in Norwegian and I will translate for you. And we will kick off with diversity and quality in the arts, a keynote by Helena Nassif, who holds a PhD in media and culture studies and is the executive director of uavbrutt, and she has flown from the other side of the world to be here with us today. So give her a warm welcome.
Hello. Hi. Hello. I got 2 emotional boosts before coming on stage. Flammeliwa, which we look a bit similar, right? The same with the blue and the same hair. And I'll read a bit and then share with you a few slides relating to the organization Culture Resource Al-Mawrid Al-Thaqafi that I manage, which is a regional organization in the Arab region. I will start by saying I'm so glad to be here today, contributing to what is promising to be a very important discussion. I want to thank Mimeta, Center for Culture and Development, the whole board, and Kato for their friendship, partnership, and invitation for me to come here. It's my first time in Norway, and it means it's important for me to be participating in this debate with the whole week, with everything that's happening today. But I will start by making a confession. It might sound anti-Danish, but it's not. Please bear with me. Because I spent my first year of master's in Aarhus, and during the first few months, I thought all Danish people were the same. Like me and Liwa. They looked and dressed the same height almost, same attitude. They all had a lot of distance until they started drinking. And absolute majority were blonde. I got a bit frightened at the beginning from like such a harmonious place. And I was not used to it, honestly, because in the Arab region, comparing, it's extremely, or we know that it's extremely diverse. In the middle? Oh, sorry. Okay. Can I move there so I can carry the... So I was then not very prepared to see the diversity in the Danish society. And it took me some time and some work to see, honestly, to understand how diverse Denmark is. And that also created a different kind of exchange between me and my other friends, and was able to to defend to my German friend that not all my male friends with beards are the same. They're different persons, but they look a little bit similar. So I start with this anecdote to highlight the importance of recognizing each other's positionalities, which are a bit different. I will start now from my own positionality to share with you how we are engaging with diversity at Culture Resource, which is, again, a regional Arab arts and culture organization, before moving to engaging a little bit with the questions on diversity and quality in the context of Scandinavia. This is so I've been responsible for managing Culture Resource since last September, so it's almost a year now. And during this year, we engaged in a 3 years strategy exercise where we re-articulated our vision, mission, values, and strategies. And all during the workshops we conducted, the term diversity kept recurring. So diversity was a very important value for us guiding our work. We ask ourselves, how are we understanding diversity and how are we practicing it? And for us, the term Arab signifies what brings these different peoples from the region together and does not seek to essentialize sameness. So we're not all the same. What made the conversation very rich with the team is that the team members, can you help me? Oh, thank you. So, I will not be reading the slides, but yeah, some things might make sense. So this is our vision, a creative, free, and inclusive cultural life that's locally rooted, diverse, and open, for example. Our programs are diverse. Our team was helpful that the team was from different parts of the Arab region. You would see a bit more than half are from Lebanon. It's not because we wanted to hire people from Lebanon, but because the legal system does not help us to always have other Arab nationals working in Lebanon, which is another problem. We also have the General Assembly members from all across the Arab region, 55 to 45 male, female. The staff, the team is majority female. And now we're trying to recruit male, but we're not finding. So the diversity, that's just to show that the diversity, what we're looking at is like diversity at the level of geography, at the level of gender, at the level of different disciplines, and also that the jury members that evaluate the applications are also from across the Arab region and that their gender balance is there. But when we come to look at one project per se, for example, at the evaluation of one project per se, we find applications from across the region. And then when the selection comes, around 10% of those who applied, the selection would choose the best 10%. And then we find that, okay, there are other countries, usually the ones who with less privileges, with less with weaker infrastructure does not get selected. And this leads us to start asking, to ask ourselves about the structural inequalities and what can we do to support the best candidates from less advantaged countries in the region and the ones who are like more marginal. The answer is not straightforward, and we are currently thinking of the different strategies we can develop to answer to the different inequalities we have observed in the statistics. I guess this process of asking these questions, as Liwa said, and discussing the possibilities is extremely rich and crucial. But I find it also difficult. It's a difficult process because it forces us to look at our assumptions and privileges and challenge us to answer, are we really ready to change the dominant power structure? This leads me to come to Europe. The experiences of artists from the Arab region moving to Europe or growing up in Europe or being born in Europe are not one and are not uniform across the European continent. And Liwa's, for example, experience, she's a fresh, she moved recently to Europe with the Syrian refugeehood. It's very different from artists in Britain, for example. Now we will have the conversation. That's why I was a bit reluctant to engage directly in this debate that was started last year on whether diversity compromises on quality or leads to quality. And in fact, I would just like to raise a few questions that I think would help me, because then I will be understanding later on more the context better. Because, so where are the voices seeking quality coming from? And is quality being used as a tool of exclusion and preservation of privilege, and whose privilege? Because sometimes the quality debate can go in very different directions. Is the artist community engaging in the process of defining what quality is? And is the process leading to important discussions on aesthetics, politics, and sociality? And I think that's what Eliwa was suggesting. Are we engaging in the diversity debate to investigate the structural inequalities hindering diversity on all levels of production, programming, and representation? Or is it only a cosmetic procedure? I understand quality as a constant and persistent quest and not an end game. And I think I wanted to be diverse with Liwa, but I guess we share a lot of stuff. So a quest by the artists for ever richer creative processes, and for higher perfection in their art, and for a deeper understanding of the qualities of their works and the works of others. And that's why we seek that the jury members are artists themselves, so that the quality debate is within the artist community. Thus, it is understandable when artists and critics engage in the process of interpreting and evaluating art. It's their work. But the same processes carries different meaning when cultural managers or policymakers do that. So I think the whole quality question, when it's taken from the perspective of cultural managers and policymakers, takes a different kind of process and leads to different results. What we do, cultural managers, many times go towards discussions that are less about the arts and more about the state building project. And I think this takes me to the conclusion. The time is good. So I'll conclude by reiterating what the different positionalities bring to the debate, and hopefully that would be a discussion for the whole day. Questions around diversity in the Arab region come to resist the nation-building projects. When we, as arts and culture organizations, in the absence of arts councils, and public support for the arts, unfortunately, when we engage in questions around diversity, then we are questioning the systems of meaning-making and building a project of critique, as well as being ambitious about constructing an alternative culture that would grow from our marginal positions to occupy more central roles within our societies. Because this is where we're coming from. In the case of Europe, where diversity as a value is also linked to a project of state building, which is it's the institutions of the state that are asking these questions, and and it carries certain ideas of sociality. These questions need not to shy away from asking the imported questions that all of us in the world need to be asking, and that's what Kamara, I think, just hinted at with the fact that there are parallel events taking place. How do we want to live together? And the question of ethnicity and race and sociality would really be central here. And although the Arab region is not a reference on nation building, I do find in our societies a high tolerance for diversity, although it doesn't look like that, but it's a tolerance that has been threatened in the last years, but that nevertheless provides an alternative view where heterogeneity and not homogeneity is the norm. And where mobility and not sedentariness is the basis of sociality. So if I want to dream of the perfect world, it would take the promise of economic homogeneity from Denmark and Sweden and Norway, but it will take the cultural diversity from our region and create this mix. So maybe with global warming, we will have it in 2 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helena, and we will see more of you later in the panel discussion. But now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ninos Joseph. Ninos works as an actor at the Royal Swedish Theatre of Dramatic Arts and as an editor for a cultural political platform Kulturwatch. And he is an internationally acclaimed dancer educated at the Royal Swedish Ballet School. And he will talk about his unintended political body. The stage is yours, Ninos.
Is this thing on? Yeah, okay, perfect. Sounded like Britney on a concert. Is this thing on? But no, I'm not. I'm not her yet. Suddenly it hit me. The phrase, which has anchored as a trauma throughout my adulthood, echoes once again in my head and cuts into my heart. It was at that point my relationship to the art form, which I have dedicated my life to, completely changed. The art form, which has previously been my identity. It was at this point that my safety barriers fell apart. I gave my colleagues a look, and we threw up our arms in the air to systematically bow to the premier applauses at the Royal Swedish Opera House. There and then, I had reached the enriched dream, which has followed me since I graduated the Royal Swedish Ballet School. But this time it was very different. It had taken me 7 years abroad to reach this dream. I could no longer relate to my body, I realized. Or was it perhaps my body who couldn't relate to the moment? Or was it maybe that my existence no longer could relate to my new surroundings? The despicable eye of the audience reached all the way across the grand stage as I look back at the situation, and my memory is very clear. The feeling of seeing the audience stand up as they laugh hysterically, pointing as they separate me and my body from my normative colleagues. It was like one of those movie sequences that makes the whole cinema auditorium, freeze because it's so uncomfortable. I'm aware that I'm imagining this, that the scene, as I remember, is only a fictional one in my head. But there and then, my hope was killed, as this could have just as been true. The phrase keeps echoing in my head while the curtain falls. I remember his word very well. "You're too dark for my typecast," he said. So I started dancing relatively late if you compare to other dancers that I've met throughout my profession and in my career throughout these 10 years. And this has been an obstacle in my career, I've spent most of my years tackling the identity crisis that most people do in their youths, but also how my growth and development could have looked very differently if I wasn't systematically placed in an oppressive structure. A structure which you are in charge with and of. So as I've said before, I'm a graduate of the Royal Swedish Ballet School. It is Sweden's primarily elite schooling for dancers. And I'm sure you're asking yourself how someone like me could end up there, because I do constantly, Some would say luck. A few would say some hard work and discipline what got me there. And a vast majority would say I'm just a political alibi in a failed integration. But what is integration? Because I'm sure by looking at me, you think that my impeccable English and Swedish, which you have not heard yet, but it is very well integrated. You think that someone who has a job, who has a career, is very well integrated, right? Because that's what we assume integration is about, right? However, for me, integration is a two-sided relationship. Because if you want me to strip off every piece of culture that I was raised with, then I expect you to do the same. If you want me to adapt, to learn your language, and to move the way you do, to look the way you do, and to completely adapt to your society, I expect you to meet me halfway. Because this is a two-sided relationship, and integrity and integration are two things that goes together. Because integration is failed until we are equal in society. And in order to reach that equality, we need to work together. So if you assume that I'm the one who needs to adapt only, for me not to be a part of a failed integration, then you are wrong, because you carry just as much responsibility of that. I grew up in Navestad. It is a suburb in Norrköping. I don't know if there's anyone from Norrköping in the audience right now. And despite the fact that municipal authorities decided to change the name after a couple of years to Ringdansen, it will always be called Navestad for me, for people like me, and for everyone else who comes from that area, because that is our identity. This was probably in hopes to clean out the unsuccessful integration project that the area, unfortunately, is a witness of. It's a brave attempt to embellish the image of the concrete jungles, a delusional reality that the segregation of the area would decrease, but an opposite reality. Politicians are allowed to call the area whatever they want to, but the problem lies in a systematically unfair resource allocation, also called socio-economical segregation. I remember how access to cultural schools, arts associations, and performing arts schools was basically non-existent for people like me, for people who grew up where I grew up, and for people with the same names as I carry. We were consistently excluded from taking part on having a taste of the so-called fine arts. And that was only because, to be honest, I don't even know how to finish that sentence, because I don't actually know what has set the foundation of why I and others like myself are not given the same conditions as others like you. Those who sit on privileged chairs, those of you who did not grow up in tiny, overpopulated, and dysfunctional apartments in the suburbs. Those of you who did grow up having their parents paying for their free time activities. Those who don't feel cheated on by the structure. Those who are a part of the structure. Those who don't need to carry the burden of not feeling represented because they are automatically represented. Those who attend seminars after seminars about diversity and inclusiveness to then sneak up to their exclusive office and work out an action plan for diversity. This was my first encounter with the despised structure and its society from the leadership and the rulers, those who later became my audience, actually, and those who are still my audience. So this is supposed to be about me and my journey. And you know, I'm that one person who always get assigned the role as a rapist because I look the way I look. I'm the one who's being told to show extra appreciation and gratefulness because I was given a job and a chance. I, whose talent and competence is being looked past in the shadow of my non-normative name. My name is Ninos Josef, and I'm here to talk about my unwillingly political body. So what is dance? Dance and movement has since ancient times been used as a form of expression and feelings and thoughts. You know, it's the language of the body, as we say. Dance is art, dance is political, dance is freedom, dance is social development, dance is a Friday night out at the club, because that is just as much of a dance. According to Wikipedia, dance is coordinated body movements, often rhythmic and to music. Each movement holds the possibility of being a dance. Basically, we're all dancers in the end of the day. But to me, dance is a bodily expression in a non-normative development process. It's a movement language where the body may work freely to create space and resolve each other together with time. So it is a sense of stimulation beyond my human reality, where time and space resolve each other again. But it is also a struggle, a constant struggle for my ownership of my personal expression. Dance is one of several performative art forms where white normative bodies can freely exercise their ignorance and getting away with it. It is one of several oppressive art forms where homogeneity is not being questioned. So throughout my career, which has taken me to some amazing places in the world, I've lived in Amsterdam for 3 years, dancing with the Dutch National Ballet. I've been at the San Francisco Ballet, the Royal Danish Ballet, and the Zurich Ballet before coming home to Sweden. And there is a specific memory which has stuck with me throughout all these years, and it is the echo of the words from my previous principal at the Royal Swedish Ballet School. She politely tried to denounce herself from the responsibility that I, as a person of color, would graduate from the school into what came to be a non-existing market for me as a dancer in Sweden. Perhaps you should seek your way abroad, as there is a narrow market for dancers of your type and look. I was naive for not understanding what was waiting for me and how my body came to be the essential thing in this whole structure. Today, I can look back at it and see it as a positive thing, which sets the foundation of a great international career, where I've gotten the opportunity to work with the masters and legends of dance, which I'm forever grateful for, a different type of gratefulness than the one I talked about before. I've been awarded prizes from the royal family for my achievements in dance, and I've been appointed as a soloist for my hard skills and work. The same title was also taken away from me as soon as I reached Sweden and ended up at the Royal Swedish Ballet, because in their eyes, I was not good enough anymore. In their eyes, I was only a typecast that was being given project contracts for 2 years straight because I wasn't good enough to get a full-time contract like my colleagues. And nowhere before around the world has my ethnicity ever been questioned. Nowhere before have I ever had the fight and the need to, and this urge of fighting to be seen and treated equal as my colleagues, until I reached back home to Sweden. So 10 years later, after graduating ballet school, when I finally touched down at home, I need to lead a battle against a union for artists so that I will be included in the same safety net as my white colleagues. A battle to ensure that letters of regulation for organizations needs to include goals regarding ethnic representation in line with the already existing ones when it comes to age, gender, and geographical spreading. This is a battle to ensure that there are clear long-term guidelines to work with ethnic diversity and inclusion. And let me tell you, this is a battle I lost because the union in Sweden refused to change the regulation. Today, the Union for Artists even lacks directives in how to implement an intersectional method within their own internal organization. Perhaps this can be interpreted as an intentional action in regards to whether or not the union is actually interested in representing people like me, people who look like me, people who come from where I come from. Because in the end of the day, they're being ignorant and they refuse to change their regulations, meaning they have no interest in representing artists of color. So, this is a scenario where questioning the lack of ethnic diversity and representations becomes illegitimate because regulations and goals are structured to allow a wide homogeneity and exclusiveness, which means that this is a structure that is failing upon artists of color. I'm witnessing how state-funded performing arts has a failed ethnic diverse representation, allowing a white, cis homogeneity to set the norm. I witness how cultural and governmental institutions and authorities continuously allocate art taxes to take the advantage of the same kind of homogenic norms within the performing arts. This means that people like me, who pay just as much as taxes, are not being given the same amount of fruit in the end of the day. Just before the year shift, the Swedish Agency for Cultural Policy Analysis came out with a report claiming that the state-funded cultural institutions in Sweden has 15.2 of employees with a different ethnic background, with a foreign background, as we say in Sweden. As a fourth of the population in Sweden consists of individuals with foreign background, one could think that this 10% of a gap is actually quite good of a job, right? I mean, that's what we've always been told, that, it's only 10% less. It's not that bad. But I will do you a favor, and I will break this down for you, because 52% out of these 25.3 which is the population with foreign backgrounds in Sweden, originates from Africa, Asia, or Latin America. That is more than half of the population with foreign backgrounds. And at the state-funded cultural institutions in Sweden, only 22% out of the total 15.2 originates from Africa, Asia, or Latin America, making the actual number 3%. Meaning that the rest of these people with foreign backgrounds could be Norwegians, Danes, or any other white people. And in times like this, perhaps one should ask ourselves, do we really need another performance without any representation? Then can we allow it to be funded by the state without actually calling it out for what it is? Blatant racism. And I know I only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to finish it up by saying that I can also not help, even though as much as I talk, I cannot help but to reflect over that thousands like me need to fight obstacles every single day to reach where I reached, and then being told to be grateful and show appreciation for the extra hard work that they have put in. I'm not asking anyone to defend me, my background, or nor my looks. Even less do I expect you to take this battle for me. However, if you choose to deny this problem, you are oppressing the battle that I'm taking, and that is to be equal to you. And that is not a lot to ask. And if you're thinking less of me by denying my problem, you have automatically decided to stand on the other side. And on the other side, you have the structural racism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ninos. We will hear more from Ninos in 15 minutes, but before that, we have Abid Hussain here, who is the Director of Diversity at the Arts Council in England. Welcome.
How do I follow that? I'm going to get straight to it because time is short, and I'm going to kick into my presentation and probably pick up from where Ninos finished off. I want to start by talking about identity. Identity is complex. It means different things to different people. Our worldview, our creative practice, and how we interact with each other is influenced by a multiplicity of identities, be it our gender, our race, sexual orientation, or religious beliefs. To my parents, I will always be Pakistani. To my daughters, I'm British. And for border control at airports around the world, I'm simply the Muslim with a beard. My selection for random security checks no longer feels random at airports. Every time I fly back to England, and it's a problem in England, I never have a problem when I go anywhere else. So every time I fly back to England from a holiday or an international speaking engagement, my recently renewed British passport will not scan at the e-gates. I was recently told by staff at border control that due to my name, I will always have to have my passport checked by an official when returning to England. Something as simple as my name, Abid Hussain, defines me as a greater risk than my colleagues at work named Simon, Michelle, Lucy, or Darren. I'm more British than I'm given credit for. I feel British, but I get tired of being asked where I really come from. I always answer Birmingham. It's not the answer people are looking for, but it's the only answer I know. Today, my gender politics is defined by being a father to 3 beautiful daughters, Miriam, Aisha, and Anisa. They inspire me to see the world differently every single day. I want them to believe that a career working in the arts is both a possibility and something that they should pursue. But to do so, my daughters must see themselves and their stories reflected on our stages, in our galleries, and across our museums. Only then can we create the conditions for them to be our future artists and our future leaders. Over the last 15 years working in the arts, I can't remember the last time I went to see a theatre performance where the characters on stage had the names Miriam, Aisha, or Anisa. If they remain invisible, they will remain voiceless. How can people feel a part of society when they don't see themselves reflected in its art, its culture, or its civic life? We can't afford to lose another generation of artists, audience members, or future leaders and possible donors because of this mistake. Today, we must ask ourselves who's missing in the room here today. Who is missing in the work that we commission and the audiences that come to see it? And how can we collectively, as policymakers and artists, create the change we want to see and make communities of artists and audiences that are invisible visible? Who, for example, are the artists and leaders of Pakistani, Somali, or Iraqi heritage that are proud to call Norway home, and what is their influence in this country? Are they present, visible, and influential in the arts organizations of Norway? Displacement of communities and people occurs for many different reasons. My grandparents experienced the trauma of partition in India due to religious conflict. Over 15 million Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs were displaced. Over 1 million people lost their lives. My parents moved to England as economic migrants. They came to escape poverty and to build a better life for their families. Today, across Europe, we continue to see economic migration, but also displacement as a result of conflict, persecution, and the erosion of civil liberties and rights. Let us remember that being forced into exile and to seek asylum is not a status, but a situation so many people find themselves in through no fault of their own. Globally, we're witnessing a shift in politics to the right. Nationalism is increasing across Europe, America, Africa, and Asia, creating hostile environments for people who may be different. In the midst of this change and volatility, we cannot lose sight of our humanity. Amongst the millions of people who are displaced every year, there are thousands of artists. Artists that need the oxygen of their creative practice as much as they need safety and shelter. How do we collectively ensure artists that are displaced to Europe are afforded the opportunity to continue their practice and their work? How do we ensure their work is given respect, recognition, and access to presentation platforms? How can they sustain their livelihoods when their asylum or refugee status does not allow them to work? And what is the role of policymakers and funders to support displaced artists? I don't have all the answers. But we're currently in the process of trying to answer these questions and so many more. IFACA, the International Federation of Arts Councils and Cultural Agencies, has recently commissioned a critical piece of research to look at artist displacement. We'll be reporting our findings later this year. In England, progress in diversifying the leadership of our established arts institutions has been painfully slow. In a keynote address delivered in London in 2014, our former chair at the Arts Council, Sir Peter Bazalgette, described the arts leadership of England as being pale, male, and stale. He could get away with saying it. We have a handful of ethnically diverse artistic directors, including Indu Rubasingham, Kwame Kwei-Armah, and Madani Yunus, running major theatres in London. The majority of our diverse leaders run smaller companies and organizations that are project-based and often produce culturally specific work. So where are our leaders located? The leadership of arts and cultural institutions in major cities like London, Birmingham, and Manchester doesn't reflect the ethnic diversity of the people that live in those cities. Kwame Kwei-Armah had to leave England and go to the United States because he was not being offered the opportunities his talent deserves. In Baltimore, he achieved incredible success, yet even when he was confirmed as the artistic director for the Young Vic, Some felt it was a risky appointment. Why? Indu Rubasingham, one of the UK's most talented directors, could not find a partner to develop and commission her play, Red Velvet. She was only able to produce the play once appointed as artistic director at the Tricycle Theatre. The production has since successfully toured to critical acclaim, both in the West End in London and Broadway in New York. Why was gaining support for Red Velvet so difficult to achieve prior to her appointment at the Tricycle Theatre? We need an honest conversation, and sometimes an uncomfortable conversation, about risk and who it applies to and who it doesn't. For too long, too many talented Black, disabled and female artists, producers and directors have seen their work deemed as too risky. In England, our most gifted, diverse talent exists far too often outside the very buildings and spaces their talent is needed within. Diverse talent is everywhere. The opportunity for that talent to flourish is not. Power and who holds power is essential. How do we ensure future leaders of our arts and cultural institutions reflect the diversity of our major cities like London, Oslo, and Malmo? My challenge to people in positions of power and leadership is really quite simple. When you're ready to vacate your position, how will you ensure you have put the right culture and conditions in place for someone to succeed you that looks and thinks differently to you? In 2016, Arts Council England launched its Changemakers initiative. The program recognized that there's a deficit of diverse leaders working across the arts sector in England. We invested in 20 changemakers, leaders who we believe have the talent and the potential to run our biggest and best arts organizations. Leaders who have faced glass ceilings, leaders who look and think differently. Leaders who are often viewed as a riskier potential appointment because of their race, disability, or gender. Through the Changemakers program, we have challenged those stereotypes. Already, we're beginning to see the dividends. 3 of our Changemakers, Sarah Wajid, Malavika Anderson, and Hannah Mason, have been appointed to permanent senior leadership roles in the arts. Andrew Miller has been appointed to our National Council at the Arts Council, and theatre makers Jess Toms, Amanda Huxtable, and Javad Alipur have presented a string of award-winning productions around the country. Javad Alipur has become only the second culturally diverse director to ever direct a main stage play at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield with his production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. His original production of The Believers Are Brothers looks at the dangers of radicalisation, won awards at the Edinburgh Festival, and played out to sold-out dates in London, and is about to embark on a national tour of England. We must eradicate the notion of race, disability, or gender as increasing risk and embrace the reality that difference is a driver for quality, innovation, and excellence. Historically in England, we've talked about the legal case for diversity, we've talked about the business case for diversity, and the moral case for diversity. The creative case for diversity is different. It makes the artistic case for diversity. No one produces art that can inspire, challenge, or move us simply because the law requires them to do so. We make art that is inspired by our passion and love for the work that we do. The creative case for diversity places diversity at the very heart of the artistic process and not in the equality action plans that Ninos talked about. It recognizes the necessity of art reflecting the diversity of all our communities, both in the work we produce and the people making that work. Rather than seeing diversity as a barrier to producing work of quality, it recognizes diversity as a driver for excellence. It allows us to have a single connected conversation about art and diversity, where diversity is no longer on the margins and under-resourced. We've talked about quality a lot today. To achieve quality, you need the resources to make work that is of high quality. And I think that's something that funding bodies need to consider across the world. If diverse communities are funding the arts through their taxes and playing the lottery, they have every right to see their communities reflected in the work that's presented. The creative case for diversity demands that we give platforms to our best talent, irrespective of their backgrounds or circumstances. Contributing to the creative case for diversity is now a mandatory requirement in our funding agreements with organisations that receive regular funding from Arts Council England. It's non-negotiable. If organisations are failing to contribute to the creative case for diversity, we have the right to stop or reduce their funding. During the Football World Cup this summer, we saw the quality, value and contribution of players to the English, Belgian and French national teams whose parents migrated from the Caribbean, Africa and the Middle East. It would be impossible to argue that diversity diluted the quality of those teams. It only served to enhance the quality. Art should be a mirror on society. However, it can only be so if we allow everyone to see their reflection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arvid. You can stay. Now I would like to invite Helena and Ninas back on stage. Where's Helena? There you are. And we have... is that going to be a problem? Is that okay? We have 15 minutes to conclude this and fix this. If there are any questions from the audience, I think, do we have one from the team over here that can look for the questions and bring a microphone, if there are any? Yes. Thank you so much for each of your keynotes. I think that one of the things that I very often encounter in the art section is this notion that since we are in the art section, we are predominantly left-wing when we vote, we go to the theater, so there is this notion that we can't possibly be racist. We can't possibly be part of this problem. We are not like the others in society. But I do still think that we have, through different terminology and different phrasing, still this notion that immigrants are taking our jobs. It's just now with the typecasting or quotation or affirmative action. There is still this notion that if black artists or artists of color get funding, that means that we are stealing the funding from somebody else. And do you think, I think that your questions, Helena, that you asked in the end of your lecture, where you said that, where are the voices seeking quality coming from? And are we using quality as an excuse of exclusion? Do you guys have any comment to that? Short question.
Is this thing on? Yeah, I believe it's just an excuse. It's an excuse to exercise your colonized mindset, basically, in my opinion. You think lesser of art that is not westernized. And if you don't think of it lesser, then you actually steal the identity of it and you put it in a white context and you're super proud of it. And you think it's high art, and you think it's quality, and we've seen it happen plenty of times where people make art about refugees without including refugees. I've seen probably at least 10 pieces of dance the past 2.5 years since I came back to Sweden, where choreographers choreograph journeys of refugees being performed by westernized white people who have no relationship to it, but who steals the identity of it. They put on some Arabic music and doing some movements that they perceive as Middle Eastern, or as they perceive as something that stems from that region, you know. So I definitely think that, yeah, it's an excuse to basically, yeah, I think I said what I should have said.
I need to stop. Hello. I need to stop following on from Ninos. Speaking as a policymaker, I think what's really important for me is when we're having a conversation about quality, who defines the conversation around quality? And too often, I think, when we think about developing initiatives or strategies to address diversity, we focus on one aspect of the ecosystem, which is the artist or the practitioner. I think it's essential that when you're developing an ecology that's going to be diverse throughout, that voice needs to be represented in the policymakers, in the funding systems, in the decision makers in the organizations, but also critically, the people who write about the art that's presented and produced. So you can then have that voice within the critical framework that can actually reflect and understand and nuance the work that's presented. And I think for diversity policy to be successful and not just be a series of interventions or follow-ups, we need to kind of think about how we address the wider ecology. And certainly, I guess from our perspective at the Arts Council, we've looked at 5 key principles. One is the creative case for diversity, so actually how do you create work that is of a high quality, that reflects communities. We talk about audiences, we talk about workforce, leadership, and we also talk about resource and investment. So until you take a kind of more holistic approach to tackling the diversity issue, we keep coming back to the frustrations that you expressed in your presentation about kind of having the seminars and the conversations, but things not moving on. And I guess what I can say, in England, this conversation has been going on for 42 years. And we're now beginning to tackle it in a very different way. So we're working on developing a new 10-year strategy at the Arts Council. So I'm really interested to hear about the experiences here. But one thing that I absolutely want to see in our next 10-year strategy is we fix the diversity issue. And we're not talking about it in 10 years' time to say we want to do it again.
I will not answer my own question.
No.
But I want to maybe say that later, but I wanted to pick up from something Abid said about arts as a mirror. And in fact, building on the conversation, because I feel a lot of the emotions that are part of our experiences and the room energy. And it's very important that I think art is also the place for imagination, and it's where we can deal with all these emotions of pain, of anger, of also fear, and where we can have this this new space, because everything is changing. This new sociality can be lived in the imagination. So that's why arts and culture, to pick up from you, is very important.
And I have an extra question for you, Helena, because in your presentation, you were talking about your own statistics within your work in your region, and how you were noticing that there was social economical underrepresentation from certain groups that were not part of your statistics. And you could see that it was because of these structures. But how do you guys go about dismantling these structures? Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, still our size is like we're starting to think of how we develop more programs, but that takes us back to the question that there is limited funding, and when there is certain limited funding, someone would get this fund. And in what you raised, that some artists would think that they are being the competition is with artists of color, or with so here there's a policy challenge, how to really work on developing programs that would target these inequalities while continuing to have limited funding. So I don't have a full answer for that, but there are ways to do it, but that would mean better partnerships, working better with the schools, which is something that we need to do. working at different levels with other people, not doing it all alone.
I think that's something that comes up, especially with funding in the Nordic region a lot, because if you compare us to the rest of the world, our funding is quite sufficient. But I think one of the arguments, especially from the heads of the institutions, is very often, yes, I would love to be more inclusive, but then I need more money. Like it would be utterly impossible to include us within the 100 million kroner budget that they already have. And is this something that you guys address in the Arts Council in England when everybody's asking for more money to include more people?
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to happen, and I think arts organisations will always advocate for more resources, and rightfully so. But I think what we did at the Arts Council, we had the option when we did our recent funding round to become a national portfolio organisation, so organisations that get regular 4-year funding from the Arts Council. It would be quite easy for us to say, as part of the funding criteria for the scheme, tell us what you're going to do around diversity and how much extra money do you need. But we made it part of the architecture of the funding programme right from the beginning to say diversity has to be integral to what you do. Because if you say you only do diversity or work with children and young people, if you can apply for extra funding, and we don't give you that extra funding, it's the work with children and young people and diversity that suffers. So we kind of reversed everything and said, you have to do the creative case for diversity, and that covers all manners of protected characteristics from gender to race to disability, but also class and socio-economic background. So there's no excuse for any of our arts organisations. And the other thing we've said is if you get more money from the Arts Council, you have a greater responsibility. So we've put more conditions on those larger organisations that get the significant amount of money. And it's not just about the work you programme, it's about who are your leaders and who's in your workforce, but also the audiences that you engage. So I think as a funder, how do you develop a funding criteria that allows you to do things differently? And in addition to that, we also had separate diversity strategic funds. When I took on the job in 2014, I had a budget of around £5 million just to do diversity initiatives. By the time I spent my budget, I had spent just under 12 million because we were able to make the case that this work is important, that the quality was out there, the talent was there. And I remember going back to my chief executive for one programme where the budget was £2.2 million. I didn't ask for an extra £100,000. I said, to do the work we want to do, we need another £3 million. And our executive board said yes.
There is a question from the audience.
Thank you. Hi. My question is about, as you said, is this thing on? Yeah, my question is about diversity in arts. Like a few years back when Hamilton went pretty much mainstream, which isn't that usual for a theatrical production, a lot of non-theater people in the US took issue with the fact that the white founding fathers.
Can you put the microphone?
The white founding fathers were played by minority people. And I think a lot of people, in the theater community, probably in this room as well, then, think, oh, that's just, backwards middle America. But, just earlier when you talked about, a bunch of white people playing, refugees, everyone was like, oh, that's not good. So do you think diversity in art is always to be applauded?
I don't mind having people of other minorities portraying refugees if I knew that refugees were given a fair chance to portray other minorities in the arts field. If I were to be given the chance to portray Hamlet or any other big role at the theater where I work right now, I would not have had anything against having my colleagues portraying refugees on stage. But as a matter of fact, as I know I will never be given that chance, then yes, I will oppose that. Because that's just natural. I mean, Also, portraying a refugee is not portraying like a masters of theater, as Hamlet, for example. Hamlet is a classical piece. A refugee is actually an identity of a person. It's completely different. It's like me portraying a black person by painting my face black, which is completely wrong. Like, you don't do that, you know? So for me, it's Netherlands. So it's a matter of portraying an artistic work, and a matter of portraying an identity is very different, because an artistic work is a history, perhaps, or it is an artistic work that could be portrayed by anyone who actually has the competence to portray that role. But an identity is actually an individual identity, which I don't think people should be stealing from each other. So I think it's very different, in my opinion, at least.
Any last comments on that? Helena? Abel? No?
Can I add something?
Sure, you can.
What Abid said. I think the Nordic arts councils have really clear regulation when it comes to working for mångfald, as we say in Swedish, diversity. I just don't think they're specific enough, and I think that's why people get around with them. I think if we would have had clear regulations where it says you need to work for ethnic representation and diversity in order to get your funding, people would have to do it. But because this word of diversity is so grand right now, people get away with it by just saying, well, you know what? I'm working internationally because I have 2 Norwegians and a Dutch dancer, which is completely different, because that's not intersectional, actually. That's not intersectional work, that's international work, which is completely the opposite, or very different, at least. I auditioned for the Royal Ballet once in London, and I remember filling out a form when I got there, where it actually said, where I had to state my ethnic identity. Was I black? Was I Arab? You know, just for them to actually see what minority I include myself in, for them to have a better view on how they work with diversity. That would never happen in Sweden, for example.
Not in Norway either.
So I think it's a matter of asking the Kulturdepartement and the Arts Council to actually specify, what do you mean with your criteria? So why do people still get away with this? Why do people still make ignorant art for taxpayers' money and they get away with it? Nobody's questioning this. And when you do, you're that one aggressive person who is making people uncomfortable in the room, you know? So, yeah, I think that's actually one of the main issues.
Last comment from Helena.
Yeah, last comment. So in the context of our organization, also we look at not just one project and not one program, but the whole program. So the question is whether how this landscape fills when you look at the whole body of grantees in 1 or 2 or 3 years. But I just wanted to, like, one of the, I'm not sure whether it's going to be challenging or not, but I'm afraid of diversity when it's thought of in a kind of a political correctness, kind of mosaic kind of construction. And in the US we see this kind of diversity, it's visible, but sometimes it reiterates the same sounds. So in a way this visible diversity masks the real diversity of difference. And the people who will make it to be the ones who are looking diversity on the screen are the ones who are accepting a certain dominant discourse and not the ones really challenging it. So this is a bit, the challenge is also sometimes to accept or to be able to hear the difficult or to let go of certain privileges. This is the most difficult thing, can come and not necessarily when we have these diverse kind of ethnic collage. So just to make sure that we're not only building the representation, but also allowing for the real difference, for people who would say something that we would think that's appalling.
Thank you. And that was the time we had So I would like to thank you all for coming today and for sharing. And you'll get a tiny gift of chocolate. You're welcome. And then it's lunch. So I will see you all back here in half an hour sharp. That's 11:30, so 28 minutes actually. Yes. Bye. It's lunch already.